The crystal chandelier above sparkled fiercely, casting sharp glints of light onto the pale face of Julian Barrett as he sat alone on a marble bench in the courtyard of the Grand Lumière Hotel, the most luxurious place in all of Paris. Just hours ago, he had stepped into the gala gathering of Europe's elite, still hailed as the tech genius once praised across headlines. Now, he was just a hollowed-out shadow, a man lost among the very circles of power he used to dominate. Je suis désolé, mais je ne pense pas chung ta fut herp. I'm sorry, but I don't think we're a good match. The fifth woman to reject him tonight had said it softly, yet with a chill that cut deeper than any scream. As she turned and walked away, the whispers drifted in like toxic smoke. His company's gone under. His best friend stole his fiancée. He's nothing but a name now. Julian loosened his black tie, breathing heavily, head buried in his hands. 6 months ago, he was a legend. Barrett Innovations was worth hundreds of millions of euros. His engagement to young businesswoman Clarisse Dumas had been seen as the perfect merger of power and prestige. Magazines dubbed him the future of a new Europe. Tonight, even a handshake from someone who used to call him weakly was a luxury he couldn't afford. The soft sound of rubber wheels rolling over marble made him glance up. A dark-skinned woman in a light gray uniform was pushing a janitorial cart across the courtyard. Her hair was neatly tied back, and the light from the courtyard illuminated her cheekbones in a bronze glow. She moved gracefully, each step purposeful, as if every motion held intent. She noticed him and paused. "Excusez-moi, monsieur," she said gently yet firmly. "Are you all right? You look like you could use some water." Julian was momentarily stunned. How long had it been since anyone asked him something like that? Not for equity, investment, or power, just simple human concern. "I'm fine," he croaked. "Just needed some air." She didn't believe him. It was written all over her face. After a moment of silent assessment, she opened her cart, took out a small bottle of water, and stepped forward, her hands extended with a sincerity so disarming it shook him. "Here. It's cold tonight. These parties always make people feel like they're drowning." Julian accepted the bottle, his hand brushing against hers, a brief contact that jolted him more than he expected. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't after anything. She simply saw someone suffering and chose to stop. "I'm Julian," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Amara N'Dione," she replied with a small, unpretentious smile. "I work the night shift here. 3 years now. After events like this, I see a lot of people walk out here like you." Julian looked at her, really looked, for the first time. She was quietly beautiful, no makeup, no facade. Something in her gaze made his chest feel lighter, as though she saw straight through what he was trying to hide. "Do you ever wish you were in there?" Julian asked, his voice barely audible. "Not pushing the cart, but among them?" Amara tilted her head, thinking, "Sometimes. But then I see them arguing, performing, stressed over things that aren't real, and I wonder, is it worth trading peace for a gown?" She chuckled softly, her eyes warm. "Money doesn't buy peace, monsieur." Julian tightened his grip on the bottle. "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a few minutes. From inside the grand hall, music drifted out, the clink of glasses, the echo of artificial laughter. For the first time in months, Julian felt calm. She didn't know who he was, didn't need to, didn't care about stock indexes or scandalous headlines. She saw a man who looked tired and alone and brought him water. "I won't keep you," he said, though he didn't want her to leave. Amara stood, her smile like a rare sunbeam piercing through a Parisian winter night. "Cleaning can wait a few minutes. Sometimes people need someone to sit with more than they need clean floors." She looked him in the eyes. "Whatever you're going through, it'll pass. Things always shift even when we can't see how yet." Julian's throat tightened. "How do you know?" "Because I've hit bottom. And I'm still here. Still standing. Still believing tomorrow can be different. That's all we need to keep going." Amara adjusted her shirt. "I should go. But if you're still around in about an hour, I get off at midnight. The staff lounge has coffee. Not fancy, but it's real." She walked away, pushing the cart slowly, her every movement deliberate and meaningful. Julian watched her go. For the first time in months, he felt like he had somewhere to return to, a reason to stay. Someone who didn't see him as a failure, but as a man needing a bit of kindness. He opened his phone. 17 missed calls. Lawyers, financial advisors, partners who once rushed to be near him. Not one message said, "Are you okay?" Julian stood up, loosened his tie, and walked toward the main hall. He had an hour to wait, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid of time passing. He felt hope. The basement staff lounge of the Grand Lumière Hotel smelled faintly of bleach, bathed in weary fluorescent light, with 2 scratched white plastic tables. Yet to Julian Barrett, it was the most breathable place he'd stepped into in months. Amara N'Dione placed 2 steaming plastic cups of coffee on the table. The scent of cheap brew drifted into the air like a rare hint of unvarnished reality. "Sugar's over there," she pointed to a tray near the microwave. "But no matter how much you put in, the coffee here never tastes sweet." "Like life," Julian muttered, lips twitching into something that resembled a smile but didn't quite get there. Amara didn't respond like those who would laugh politely for status at networking events. She simply looked at him attentively, patiently. "Do you often drink coffee in hotel staff rooms?" she asked, not mocking, just genuinely curious. "No," Julian admitted, fingertips grazing the hot cup like he sought balance. "I've never stepped into a room like this. Until tonight." She nodded, sat across from him, and pulled a foil-wrapped sandwich from her canvas backpack. "Then tonight, you had a brand new experience. And not a bad one," Julian said, looking at her, and for the first time felt like he could breathe. Amara carefully split the sandwich and slid one portion across the table. "Ham and cheese, nothing fancy. But my mother always taught me, a meal should be shared." Julian hesitated, but his stomach decided for him. He hadn't eaten all day. At the gala, appetite had felt impossible. "Thank you," he said, taking the sandwich half, stunned to realize he couldn't remember the last time someone had shared food with him. "That's sad," Amara said, not pitying, just honest. "Everyone deserves someone who wants to share food with them." They ate in silence, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, didn't need filling. Julian looked up and met her eyes. "I lost my job recently." He hadn't planned to say it. But here, in this dimly lit room filled with human warmth, he couldn't keep the mask on. "The board pushed me out after the stock collapsed. My closest partner took my fiancée. The press calls me the downfall of the century. I don't even know who I am anymore." Amara chewed slowly, then nodded. "I understand." "You do?" Julian frowned. "How could you?" 2 years ago, she began, her eyes unwavering. "I worked at a local bank. I was the first to go when France slashed budgets after the financial crisis. Rent was due. My sister was in med school. I thought I was going to lose everything. Then I got a job here, night shift." She sipped her coffee. "I used to feel invisible. But I learned that the worst moments are when you find out who you are." Julian was quiet. For the first time, he felt understood and not pitied. Not tabloid fodder. Just one person sitting across from another, both having fallen and gotten back up. "What kept you going?" he asked. "Family. Dreams. And the belief that failure doesn't mean the end." She looked him straight in the eye. "What about you?" Julian lowered his head. "I don't know anymore. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan." "That's okay," Amara said gently. "Sometimes, not knowing is the first step to discovering what you truly need." They talked until the wall clock neared 1 a.m. Amara told him about her night classes and teaching immigrant children at the community center. Julian spoke of his childhood in the English countryside chasing grasshoppers, unbothered by stock indexes. As they stood to leave, Julian hesitated. "Can I give you a ride home?" Amara laughed softly. "I take the bus. After 3 years, I'm used to it. Not fancy, but it gets me where I need to be." "Please," Julian said, eyes serious. "At least let me do something kind. After you shared your dinner. And your kindness." Perhaps it was something in his voice, something true. Amara nodded. "All right. But I'm not a woman who needs saving. I'm saying yes because I know you need something simple. A little kindness. Julian's sleek black sedan was still parked in the underground garage, left there for the gala. When the valet brought it out, Amara looked at it for a moment, not judging, then slid into the passenger seat as if she had done so 100 times before. Thank you for tonight, Julian said as the car glided through the quiet streets of Paris. Thank you for listening, Amara replied. I was at that party to mop the floors. You went because you thought you had it all, but it turns out no one was listening to you. You're right, Julian exhaled. You gave me something I couldn't buy. You made me feel seen. That's enough to start again, Amara said, voice soft but certain. The world doesn't end, it just shifts. The key is learning to flow with it, not fight it. When they pulled up in front of a modest building in the 19th arrondissement, Julian got out and opened her door. Amara turned and looked at him for a long time. Julian, I know we only met a few hours ago, but I want you to remember this. What you've lost doesn't define you. The man I sat with tonight, the one who shared a sandwich, who listened, who knew how to say thank you, he's worth fighting for. Julian swallowed hard. Will I see you again? I work night shifts from Tuesday to Saturday. If you are near the hotel after midnight, the coffee in the staff room still isn't sweet, but it's real. She stepped into the building, leaving Julian beneath the pale yellow glow of the streetlight. For the first time in months, he felt something beginning to take root, not in his bank account, but in his chest. And for the first time, he felt like he wanted to live. 1 week after their first coffee night, Julian Barrett returned to the Grand Lumière at midnight, carrying 2 cappuccinos and a paper bag of croissants from Leclerc. He sat waiting in the courtyard, on the very same marble bench where they first met. Unlike last time, this time, he came by choice. Not from despair, but because something gave him reason to look forward for the first time in a long while. Amara stepped out from the service hallway, hair tied high, her uniform coat draped loosely over her shoulders. She saw him from afar, a flicker of surprise on her face, but not disbelief. She walked toward him, gracefully, eyes playfully scrutinizing. Is that a real cappuccino this time? Not the instant kind from the staff lounge. Julian held the cup up. I'm learning to do things a bit more properly. She sat down beside him, accepting the cup, eyes gleaming. That's a significant improvement. They talked more than the previous night. Julian shared that he once wanted to become a teacher as a child, but his father had steered him into tech, calling it a future with market value. Amara confessed she had studied finance out of necessity, seeking stability, but always dreamed of doing social work, helping those who truly needed it. I applied to the social work program at Sorbonne, she said, her eyes lighting up. They accepted me, but I can only afford to take 1 class at a time each semester. Julian looked at her, and the thought struck him clear, uncalculated. I want to help you finish the program. Amara turned to him, brows tightening. Help? What do you mean? I want to cover your tuition, so you can study full-time, so you can graduate sooner, so you don't have to scrub floors and revise in hotel restrooms anymore. Silence pressed between them heavier now. Amara stared at her cup, then met his gaze head-on. Julian, I like you, but I can't accept money from someone I'm building a friendship with, someone I'm beginning to trust. This isn't charity. Then what is it? It's an investment. Julian sat upright. You have a dream worth chasing. I have the means, and for the first time, I want to use them for something that matters. Amara paused. Then she nodded, slow but firm. All right. But under one condition. You loan me the money. Not a gift. Not a grant. I'll sign a contract, and once I graduate, I'll pay it back with interest. Julian blinked. I don't need interest, but I need to repay it. She tightened her grip on the coffee cup. It's how I keep respect in this relationship with you and myself. This silence was no longer strained. It was mutual respect, settling quietly between them. Julian extended his hand. Deal. Amara shook it firm and unwavering, like a multi-million-euro contract, but its value far surpassed any deal Julian had ever signed. They lingered longer, sharing croissants like 2 university students meeting at a weekend park. She spoke of her sister Gabrielle, who studied medicine in Lyon, and her mother, a laundry worker for over 30 years, raising 3 children alone. Julian had never listened like this. Not to respond, not to analyze, just to listen, as if relearning how to be human. On the drive back, they passed a small district near Belleville, African shops, corner markets, and community clinics, scattered under dim lights. Amara pointed at a modest center nestled between two concrete buildings. I volunteer there every Saturday, serve breakfast to people experiencing homelessness, help families find jobs, fill out paperwork. Julian tilted his head. You do all that? On top of school and night shifts? Someone once told me, surviving isn't the same as living. I don't want to exist. They stopped in front of her building. Julian didn't say goodbye. He asked, can I come to that center? This Saturday. Amara smiled, not surprised. Not touched, just a quiet acceptance, as if he had always belonged there. Zevon M. Bring non-slip shoes. Julian nodded, and as she stepped into the building, he realized this was no longer a journey to reclaim his reputation. It was a journey to reclaim himself, and the woman named Amara N'Dione, with janitor sleeves and unshakable eyes, had just become the first person he wanted to walk with, not conquer. On Saturday morning, Julian Barrett arrived at the gates of the Centre Communautaire Belleville before the sun had fully risen. The early Paris air was crisp, making him curl deeper into a leather coat that once screamed luxury, but today it looked no different than any other middle-aged man entering a quiet residential block. He had no assistant with him, no Mercedes, no CEO badge, only a small backpack, a box of cookies he had personally bought, and an inexplicable nervousness spread from his chest to the tips of his fingers. Amara was already there, wearing a green volunteer apron. Her hair was tied up high, and her hands swiftly packed sandwiches into paper bags with practiced ease. When she spotted him, she looked up, a faint smile brushing her lips, soft as morning wind, yet warm enough to melt the last remnants of cold inside him. You came. You thought I was the type who makes polite promises? Julian replied, trying to sound casual, but his heart warmed. No, Amara shrugged. I thought you were the type who makes promises and then follows through. In the first 3 hours, Julian learned how to serve breakfast, sort donated clothes, label secondhand children's books, and help an older woman find a local clinic with Arabic-speaking doctors. No one recognized him. No one asked what he did for a living. No one cared about Barrett Innovations' stock price. A young brown-skinned boy named Farid accidentally spilled a whole water jug on the floor. Julian immediately knelt to help him clean up, smiling. It's all right. I once spilled water all over the conference room during my first product launch. Farid giggled. Did they fire you? They tried. So I bought the company 3 months later. The boy burst into laughter. Julian laughed too, realizing it was his first real laugh in months. At the end of the morning, Julian and Amara sat resting on a row of benches outside, warm tea in hand, watching the kids kick around a plastic ball. No grass field, no expensive shoes, but laughter rang under the early spring's clear blue sky. So, Amara turned to him. I feel humbled and useful because you did the work. Not just sign a check or pose for PR photos. Also because no one here knows I used to be Julian Barrett. And if they did, I'm not sure. But I hope it wouldn't change how they treat me. Amara looked at him, her gaze softening. It wouldn't. They know the difference between those who come to give and those who come to join. Julian turned toward her. I want to join you. Not just here, but wherever this goes. I don't know exactly what I want to do next. But I don't want to return to being the man who stood alone in a crowd. You don't need to rush into a big next job, Amara said. Maybe this time, let your heart lead and your mind follow. Julian nodded. He had never lived that way, but he wasn't afraid at that moment, surrounded by children's laughter and the smell of toasted bread. On the way home, Julian said, if I wanted to invest in this center to expand the programs, job training, life skills workshops, would you accept? Amara looked at him for a long time. Yes, if you don't bring your company's logo, and if you don't expect people to be grateful, not investing in reputation, investing in dignity, then yes. Julian became familiar with the Centre Communautaire Belleville in the following weeks. Saturday mornings, he served breakfast. On weeknights at midnight, he waited in the Grand Lumière courtyard with 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Amara. No one officially called them a couple, but their presence became something that needed no definition. They spoke about small things. Amara's psychology midterm, A second-hand bookshop Julian discovered in the fifth arrondissement, a fig tree growing sideways in the park near her home. And in those fragmented, ordinary conversations, Julian realized he didn't need to do anything remarkable, just needed to be there. One night, Amara arrived late after class, breathless as she sat on the bench. She pulled a half sandwich from her backpack and offered it to him. Tomato, goat cheese, rocket. I threw it together quickly, but it's still good. Julian accepted it without hesitation. No awkwardness, no refusal. That small gesture, sharing a humble meal, felt more valuable than any lavish gift he'd ever received at elite galas. You know, Amara said, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup, the day I lost my job at the bank, I didn't cry. But the day I had to tell my sister I couldn't send money for her next semester, I sat in a restroom stall and cried like a child. Julian tightened his grip on the cup. And yet you didn't give up. I used to believe I didn't need anyone, that being independent meant never accepting help. But I've come to learn. Sometimes courage is knowing when to receive from the right person, at the right time. She looked at him, her gaze soft. Like how you accepted half my sandwich. Julian chuckled. You make it sound like I'm a kindergarten kid being handed lunch for the first time, never mind that I've signed million-euro contracts in boardrooms. Because to me, the value lies in who shares, not in who receives. He fell silent, then murmured, I like the way you see the world. It makes me want to start seeing everything anew. Amara tilted her head gently. Have you ever truly loved someone, Julian? The question wasn't light, but it wasn't meant to test. It was simple curiosity, the kind she always spoke with. I thought I had, Julian admitted, but now I'm not so sure. Because if that was love, why have I never felt the peace sitting here with you? The night wind moved through the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from a second-floor balcony. Amara smiled faintly, offering no reply. But that smile made Julian feel forgiven for every unnamed mistake he'd ever made. When he drove her home that night, for the first time, she didn't step out right away. They sat in the car under the amber streetlight, the stillness illuminating the tiniest details. Her hand rests on her bag, and he is still on the steering wheel, both hesitating. Amara. Yes? I think. I'm falling in love with you. No background music. No fireworks. Just silence. She turned toward him slowly. I think. I'm starting to feel something too. But I need to be sure. This isn't just you needing someone to make you feel worthy again. And I need to be sure I'm not just getting swept up in the idea of a man who once had everything, now needing someone to stay. Julian nodded. I understand. You don't want to be a side character in my redemption story, just as I don't want you to be the lead in my dream of independence. So what do? We sit here, Amara said warmly. We don't define anything, just two people learning how to trust again. It won't need to be rushed if this feeling is real. Julian nodded, and they sat there, hands not touching but hearts quietly in sync, not following the call of passion, but the whisper of sincerity. That night, when Julian returned to his apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the couch, replaying every word Amara had said, every glance, every breath. And he realized for the first time he didn't want to possess a woman. He just wanted to be worthy of her presence. Late Monday afternoon, Julian Barrett sat in a small cafe on Rue Montorgueil, an untouched espresso in front of him, and a phone that wouldn't stop vibrating. Third call from the same number. Finally, he answered. Julian? It's Richard. Richard Levant, his former legal advisor, once warned him of the board's spectacular coup at Barrett Innovations. Hello, Richard, Julian replied calmly. I'll keep it short. The board wants to meet with you. Julian narrowed his eyes. I thought they were thrilled to have me out. Things change. Stocks are still plummeting. The new CEO is getting shredded in the media over internal scandals. They think that if you return, the company can stabilize. But you'll have to initiate the proposal. Julian was silent for a long moment. Outside the window, Parisians passed by in a constant stream. Paris never stood still, but time inside him had paused. Any conditions? He asked. They'll give you full executive control, but you have to sign a waiver. No lawsuits, no compensation claims for reputation damage. I'm not sure I even want to run a company anymore. Julian, don't romanticize your crisis. This is a chance to take back what was yours. You built that empire. Don't let it die because you spent a few months hiding from reality. After the call ended, Julian sat still for a long while. Part of him wanted to go back to repair, to prove, but another part was afraid. That night, he told Amara as they sat in their usual break room at Grand Lumière. "They want you back?" she asked, not surprised. "Yeah, a chance to restore my name, power, maybe even wealth. And do you want that?" "I don't know," Julian exhaled. "I used to live for the company. Now I live for something else. For Saturday mornings at the center. For kids like Farid. For nights like this." Amara looked at him. "The question isn't whether you return or not. It's, who will you be if you do?" Julian nodded slowly. "If I go back, I want to do it differently." "Differently how?" "No massive bonuses. There are no stock rewards for leadership unless a community benefits program is in place. I want to raise base pay for every office and factory worker, create an internal education fund, and I want the company to invest directly in the communities where our factories and offices are located." Amara was silent. Then she smiled. "Sounds like a new kind of CEO. Not new, just the real me, finally." 3 weeks later, Julian walked into the boardroom of Barrett Innovations headquarters. No legal team, no TAI, no grand presentation, just a 12-page document titled Barrett Innovations Ethical and Social Restructuring Proposal. The board was stunned at first. Some resisted, but when they looked at market statistics, recent PR disasters, and plummeting stakeholder trust, they knew they needed someone like Julian, someone who had fallen and learned to rise differently. As he stepped out of the building, Julian stood still in front of the company sign that bore his name. This time, he didn't feel proud. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt responsible. That evening, he didn't celebrate. No champagne. He drove straight to the Belleville Center, just in time to see Amara finishing a resume, writing workshop for a group of immigrant youth. When the session ended, he waited for her in the courtyard. Under the golden lamplight, he spoke only one sentence. "They agreed to everything." Amara nodded. "Then you chose the path you believe in." Julian looked at her, his gaze carrying the weight of an unspoken vow. I chose the path we believe in." And for the first time, Amara didn't keep her distance. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, right there in the worn-out courtyard, where love wasn't measured by diamond rings or seaside estates, but by trust and the courage to be reborn. In his first month back as CEO, Julian Barrett learned a hard truth. Changing a system is more complex than building it from scratch. There were snide emails from the CFO, perplexed glances from shareholders, whispers that he had lost his edge after he proposed scrapping the generous stock bonus plans for senior executives. One headline in Le Monde Économie read, "From iron-willed CEO to romantic philanthropist, has Julian Barrett lost his way?" Julian didn't react. He kept showing up to meetings, kept making decisions that were, by corporate standards, unsexy, increasing maternity benefits, redesigning workspaces to accommodate disabled employees, and mandating that regional directors dedicate 10% of their time each month to community work. The backlash peaked when Julian proposed allocating 2% of the quarterly profits into a community education fund to build vocational training centers in high unemployment districts. Why prioritize people who don't contribute to shareholder value? One board member snapped during a meeting. Julian sat upright, voice steady and low. "Because if we don't help raise the social baseline, our products will only serve the top 1%. And then we'll die inside the very bubble we built for ourselves." Outside the company, former colleagues watched curiously. Some scoffed, but some stayed silent, watching him with a mixture of doubt and growing respect. Meanwhile, at the Belleville Community Center where Amara worked, anonymous donations began arriving. A new printer, laptops for skill training classes, even a clean water filtration system. Amara knew who was behind it, but she said nothing. As Julian arrived at the courtyard one evening, Amara handed him a newspaper clipping. The cover of Courier International showed him awarding certificates at a job training graduation. The headline was simple: Julian Barrett, a CEO relearning how to be human. Julian stared at it, then let out a soft laugh. "I don't want to be a symbol." "You don't have to be," Amara said. "But because you don't want to be, you've become one people can trust." Julian looked down. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just trying to redeem myself. If all this change is about making me feel better, not doing good." Amara looked into his eyes. "You're doing the right thing, and you don't need to be perfect to do it. You need to be honest." A week later, at the company's main headquarters, Julian made a decision that stunned the entire boardroom. He resigned as CEO to become chair of the Barrett Foundation for Social Justice and Education. His successor? A completely new face to the public. Chantal Moreau, a black female engineer and department head whom Julian had quietly mentored for months. "This is not a retreat," Julian told a hall full of press. "It's a transition. A system only truly changes when its leaders know when to step aside and leave the seat to those who carry new values." His speech went viral, but Julian didn't check the metrics. That evening, he drove back to Amara's small apartment, where the light was always softer than any spotlight. When she opened the door, he said, "I resigned." She wasn't surprised. "You look lighter, because I finally know where I belong isn't at the top. It's here on the ground, where people like you walk every day." Amara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Welcome back." Julian Barrett, once hailed as the tech phenomenon of Europe, now stood in a cramped kitchen, cooking spaghetti beside the woman who once shared half a cold sandwich with him. And he had never felt richer. 6 months after Julian Barrett stepped down as CEO, Amara N'Dione's third-floor apartment in Ménilmontant had changed quietly but meaningfully. Not because of new furniture, but because of the warmer, busier, and more quietly joyful atmosphere. Julian set up his laptop at the tiny dining table to design training programs for the Barrett Foundation. Amara sat beside him, editing lesson plans for her critical thinking and CV writing class at the community center. They didn't live together, but Julian came by every Tuesday and Friday evening, cooked, washed dishes, brewed tea, then wrote. No one said it aloud, but they both knew this was home. While sorting through books one evening, Amara pulled out an old cardboard box. Inside were university transcripts, handwritten essays, and an acceptance letter to a master's program in sociology at the Sorbonne. "I got in 3 years ago," Amara said, voice soft. "But my mother had just been hospitalized. Gabrielle was still halfway through med school. I gave up the spot." Julian held the letter in his hands for a long moment. "Do you want to apply again?" Amara shook her head. "I don't need a degree to know what I want anymore. I want to teach. I want to help people like me. And I'm already doing that." Julian nodded. But his eyes held a silence that said more than his words. At the end of that month, the community center hosted a graduation ceremony for 18 students from the new vocational program, electricians, junior accountants, and library assistants. Amara opened the event with a short, sincere, and moving speech. "When I first started here, I thought I was just an invisible black girl with a dream no one would fund. But today, I stand here not because someone gave me a chance, but because I was willing to take one when it finally came." Julian stood at the back, among proud parents and cheering students. He didn't go on stage. He didn't speak. He just watched Amara and knew every change he had worked for had started with this woman and her quiet dream. That night, back in the apartment, Amara kicked off her shoes and sank into the sofa. She rested her head on Julian's shoulder. He held her hand and asked softly, "Are you happy?" "Yes, but I'm not satisfied." Julian chuckled. "Why not?" "Because there are too many people like I used to be. And right now, we're only helping a few dozen each month." He squeezed her hand. "Then we'll do more." She looked up. "What are you thinking? You once said you didn't need a degree anymore. But you'll need operations if you ever want to build a nationwide network of community training centers. You'll need systems. You'll need the language of institutions." Amara was quiet. Julian continued. "I'm not saying you should study for prestige, but if you want to make a significant shift, you'll need a seat at the policy table, and you deserve that seat." Amara thought for a long time. Then, like a sudden beam of light, "If I return to school, would you help me babysit every weekend? I teach kids now, you help me watch them." Julian laughed. "Role reversal? Number just. Taking the next step." Together, the following week, Amara submitted her application to the Master of Public Policy program at Sciences Po. Julian began assembling a legal advisory team focused on informal education reform. They rented a modest office in the 12th arrondissement used for workshops, training sessions for community educators, and even had a mini fridge with sandwiches for late-arriving students. Julian watched from behind the glass one morning as Amara stood teaching her first class at the new center. She was lecturing on citizen data autonomy in the digital age, but what struck him wasn't the content. It was the students' faces. Focused, inspired, alive like fire catching on kindling. And he knew she was no longer the woman who once shared half a sandwich. She was someone now sharing the future itself and making it grow for everyone. Autumn in Paris laid its wet golden leaves over the boulevards like a quiet, heavy blanket. While the city braced itself for winter, Julian Barrett began a journey he hadn't anticipated. A return to Aubervilliers, the suburb where his father had grown up, and the place Julian had long buried in silence. The old house was gone. The elementary school where his father taught physics was now a convenience store. But what about the corner cafe where immigrant workers used to gather? Still there, Julian sat alone, sipping an espresso and listening to Arabic, Wolof, and Portuguese conversations. An elderly Algerian man recognized him. Barrett, Louis's boy? Julian froze. No one had called him that in decades. Yes, that's me. The man smiled, eyes glowing. Your father taught me physics. He never hit students, but he made us copy entire notebooks if we disrespected each other. Julian listened, chest tightening. The man he once resented for choosing a modest, humble life had left something Julian himself never quite achieved at the top. Genuine, enduring respect. Julian didn't go to Amara's apartment back in Paris that evening. He headed straight to the temporary housing camp in Saint-Denis, recently under threat from government displacement orders for aesthetic disruptions. The Barrett Foundation was among the few organizations openly opposing the move. Julian didn't bring a staffer, just an old sweater, a folder of documents, and a bag of baguettes for the kids. He sat on the concrete courtyard, talking with a group of Congolese men and an elderly Syrian woman who didn't speak French, but her eyes spoke volumes. A little girl, Leela, handed him a drawing. Two people holding hands in the middle of the street. You're like that man in the movie, but without a cape. Julian laughed. I don't need a cape. I just need kids like you to believe in me. 3 days later, inside the Paris City Hall, a closed-door meeting occurred between government officials and the Barrett Foundation. The director of social policy leaned forward, sharp. Mr. Barrett, we respect your work, but if you continue publicly criticizing the relocation effort, we'll revoke the operating permit for your community center in District 12. Julian was quiet, then said, voice firm, if I must choose between staying operational and staying silent in the face of injustice, I'd rather disappear with my conscience intact. They glared. Julian stood, bowed slightly, and left no begging, no compromise. When Julian told Amara what had happened, she wasn't surprised. She said, now you understand why I declined that government job years ago. Because you didn't want to be excellent inside a broken system. Exactly. I wanted to change it from the outside. Julian smiled faintly. Maybe we are the new system. It just doesn't have a name yet. Amara looked at him long and steadily. Then we must be ready. To be unpopular. Not to be invited on television. To not be celebrated. I know, Julian said. And I accepted the day you shared half your sandwich with me. That night, they co-wrote the Barrett N'Dione Citizen Declaration, a manifesto calling for the creation of community self-governance zones, hybrid spaces combining education, employment, social security, and local autonomy entirely run by residents. The declaration was posted online. No flashy promotions. However, within a week, it had over 100,000 downloads and was translated into 8 languages. It wasn't a constitution. It wasn't a law. But it was written in truth, in frustration, in hope, and it ended with a sentence that made all of Paris slow down while reading. If the system does not see our worth, then we will build a place where every human has a seat, not by residency, but by dignity. 2 years after Julian Barrett left his CEO title, Paris was no longer just a city of financiers, politicians, artists, or fashion designers. Paris now had a new kind of community one people had begun to call the mapmakers. Not those who drew borders with money, power, or parliamentary votes, but those who rewrote geography with small, steady actions and no need for credit. In Belleville, the first center co-founded by Amara and Julian had grown into 8 branches across Ile-de-France from Saint-Denis to Montreuil. These centers weren't just for vocational training. They connected single mothers to doctors. They helped immigrant boys find public libraries. They offered evening classes in Wolof, Tamazight, and Vietnamese. Julian no longer drives a car. He rode a bike. No assistance. No VIP badges. But when he passed a construction site or metro stop, people nodded at him. Monsieur Barrett. Not out of reverence, but because they knew he saw them. Amara, meanwhile, had defended her master's thesis on distributed justice models, a theory born from her lived work in the community. She received offers to lecture at Sciences Po and to consult for the Ministry of the Interior. She declined them all. Instead, she became principal of Lycée Communautaire N'Dione, the first high school in Paris fully crowdfunded and self-governed by its residents. One spring day, they received an invitation from the United Nations to speak at the World Forum on Social Justice in Geneva. Julian wanted to decline, but Amara said, "We need to tell this story not for us, but for those starting from where we once stood." At the forum, they did not have PowerPoint. No grand rhetoric, just two people standing in the center of a hall, telling stories about a shared sandwich, about Farid, about mothers who couldn't read their children's school letters. Julian ended with a single sentence. Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with who you sit next to at lunch, what you're willing to share from your bag, and whether you'll listen to voices the world refuses to hear. The entire auditorium rose to its feet, not to celebrate, but as a quiet reflex of hope. Back in Paris, they walked across Place de la République. Julian paused at an old wall, where someone had spray-painted in white. "If they won't open doors, we'll build houses with more doors." Barrett. N'Dione. Amara looked at him, laughing. "You didn't write that, did you?" "Number." But someone heard us. They held hands. No parades. No cameras. Just two people once broken by the society they now helped mend. And as they walked on, there was no visible flare of light. But the seeds they had planted in hearts, classrooms, and every center were beginning to sprout. Not loud, not fast, but irreversibly. Because now, they were no longer living to prove they mattered. They were living to build a world where no one would ever have to prove. They deserved to be treated with dignity.